Just actually, it looks like Stuart Robert is stepping up now. So this is in response to the speech by the Prime Minister, Julia Gillard, just in the last hour or so that we carried live. And this was the national security strategy. The Prime Minister was saying this is the first time there's been a national security strategy. She's identified the top risks that the nation faces. She's also listed a couple of areas where she thinks there can be increased effort over the next couple of years. So it looks like that could be a while off yet. So we might come back to that media conference when he steps up. Actually, so sorry about that. Looks like he is stepping up now.
The bottom line from the Prime Minister's national security statement today is that the Prime Minister and Labor simply can't be trusted when it comes to national security. The national security statement today is accompanied by $7 billion worth of defence cuts this year. The Prime Minister has shown her track record when it comes to national security and defence in general, a track record of $25 billion worth of cuts over the last 5 years to defence, a track record of border security disaster, over 32,000 irregular maritime arrivals and over 550 boats. That's the Prime Minister's track record when it comes to national security and defence. It's unbelievable. It can't be believed. The Prime Minister simply can't be trusted. Keeping in mind this was the Prime Minister with her ministers before the last election that said 38 times they would increase defence expenditure by 3%. 38 times. Well, defence expenditure has been cut by 10.5% this year alone, and down to levels not seen since 1938. That's the level of trust the Prime Minister has when it comes to national security and defence. Today, the Prime Minister announced no new initiatives apart from the co-location of cyber security elements between various agencies of the national security within Australia. If she wanted to make a tangible and real difference to national security today, she could implement the Howard government's proven and tried border protection regimes. She could implement them today. She could implement temporary protection visas today, safely turning around boats today. That would make a real and tangible difference to national security.
How is stopping the boats going to help stop cyber attacks on Australia, though? This is actually a pretty important centre, don't you think?
No question that co-locating areas of cyber security is important, but national security and defence is not just about cyber security. That is one component, albeit making up two of her three central points. She announced 8 pillars today. One of those is the defence of Australia, its sovereignty and its interests. Well, how do you credibly defend the sovereignty of Australia and its interests when you have literally hollowed out and gutted the Defence Force to the tune of $25 billion? One of the pillars is dealing with the issues of border integrity and security. How do you have a secure and integrous border when it is so porous that 32,000 people have managed to come here on leaky boats at the risk of their lives and the lives of crew and people on board?
So do you believe asylum seekers are a national security issue, a national security threat?
The Prime Minister has stated that the integrity of our borders is one of the key pillars of her national security architecture. If that's the case, and I think the Prime Minister is right, that strong borders are a national security issue, she needs to demonstrate the strength of that statement by securing our borders.
So will the Coalition make border protection and handling of asylum seeker arrivals a national security issue?
The integrity of our borders has always been an issue of national security. The Prime Minister made it very clear that serious crime, including the movement of weapons into Australia, is part of what national security is looking at. She made it clear that effective borders is part of our national security apparatus, as is cyber security.
And do you accept there's any grounds for defence spending cuts, given we're out of Iraq, we're getting out of Afghanistan, we're out of East Timor? The US has also made some pretty big defence cuts. Isn't there an argument that we should be spending less?
No, the argument is we should be having the Defence Force we need to secure our interests and our borders and our sovereignty and our men, women and children, not only here but overseas. We need a credible security apparatus, a credible Defence Force to meet the threats that we face. And now, we had a white paper in 2009 that outlined what that credible Defence Force was, and that of course now has been completely and utterly scrapped. Even the leaking of the white paper that the government is bringing forward by a year, coincidentally in line with an election, even that is showing that it is very scant on detail when it comes to funding.
So do you think we are in a different era to immediately after 9/11? You seem to be saying we should be spending just as much as we were then.
Now, the Coalition has made it very clear that if we were to win office and gain a full understanding of the degree to which our national accounts are in order, we will look aspirationally at bringing defence expenditure back up to 2% of GDP and getting real growth in terms of 3%, to build a defence force that was outlined in the 2009 White Paper that is credible, that meets our emerging needs. Keeping in mind we're in an area which is experiencing a rapid arms race. The expenditure of militaries across Asia is substantial and significant, and we are waning largely behind.
And how is your aspiration, you've just said there, any different to the government's aspiration?
Well, the government's aspiration, as per the leaked white paper, is to try and cap the disastrous expenditure on defence at 1.5% of GDP. These are levels not seen since 1938. I mean, the Howard government in the last 7 budgets increased on average real expenditure in defence by 3.3%. This government has reduced expenditure by 10.5% in this year alone. I think our aspiration in terms of what we can do is vastly different to what the government has actually delivered.
Wouldn't that be taken more seriously if you said we are going to do it?
It's very difficult to make very definitive calls when you've got no idea at the extent of the Treasury finances. 200 times the government, the Prime Minister and Treasurer said they would balance the books. 200 times now they've come out to say there won't be any surplus. This is a Prime Minister that simply can't be trusted. That's the challenge.
Do you accept the basic premise that we have moved now from a position where the real threat is from non-state actors, in other words terrorists, to state players?
I think terrorism will remain an insipid threat for at least the foreseeable future. Now, whether the rise of state actors has eclipsed those of non-state actors may well be an academic and moot point. They both remain significant. The Prime Minister has mentioned the state actors in terms of the missile and the nuclear technologies that North Korea is adapting. She mentioned Iran, as well as made passing comment to some of the terrorism issues in North Africa. They'll both remain prolific. They'll both remain issues that we need to contend with.
Is Australia strategically vulnerable in the sense that we're cutting defence spending? The other countries that are cutting defence spending are essentially our allies, whereas those who are potential strategic threats to us are doing anything but cutting their defence spending.
Well, the former National Security Advisor, Major General Duncan Lewis, now our Ambassador to NATO, made it very clear that the level of cuts being experienced by this government was putting our strategic posture at risk, and that any further cuts would make our defence force irrelevant. They're his words, not mine.
Parts of defence are actually suffering because we are spending less, or we will be, on Afghanistan and our overseas commitments. So what parts of defence, can you give me some examples that will suffer from these cuts?
37% of all defence projects have either been cut or deferred. The operational budgets now across all of your units within Australia have been cut by up to 30%. Your reserve forces now have been cut by 10 to 20%, with most reservists not getting any days training out till about February or March this year. Projects have been slipped. The air warfare destroyer has been slipped by 2 years. The list goes on and on. Phase 2 of the improvised explosive device project, which is about protecting our soldiers from the threat of IED devices, has been slipped by 18 months.
War is increasingly technological. Are these spending cuts indicating that we're going to be left essentially with Lee Enfield rifles in a world that's far more, obviously it's not Lee Enfield rifles, but essentially with the last generation technical equipment going into war, we're simply not upgrading at the rate that we have to?
Well, the leaked white paper has shown that the government intends for us to keep our equipment longer. Now, in a region where militaries are expending an enormous amount of money, where technology is being rolled out across our region quickly, for the government to say, sorry, we're broke and we aren't going to increase expenditure and you need to keep your equipment longer, borders on the dangerous.
How worried are you about China in relation to its increased military expenditure, in relation to cyber security threats? How big a role does China play in all this?
I think China plays an enormous role in our region, but we also have an enormous role in terms of engaging. We're only one of 2 nations in the world that enjoy live firing exercises with the People's Liberation Army Navy, i.e. the Chinese Navy. So we have a very strong engagement process and practice with the Chinese. We had a number of their naval vessels visit just before Christmas, and we do naval exchanges with them. So Australia's military engagement with China is strong and should continue to be strong.
Nonetheless, is it a potential threat?
China is certainly a challenge that needs to be managed, and the best way to manage challenges is to engage practically, to engage militarily.
How is it a challenge that needs to be managed?
Well, keeping in mind there's nothing better in terms of understanding and developing trust than for militaries to live fire together. China, of course, in 2009 extended their 9-dash line in terms of their territorial expansionary objectives into the South China Sea. Our nations in the region reacted somewhat negatively to that. Therefore, we need to cooperatively work together.
So do you agree the government's been taking the right approach then with China in terms of balancing the opportunities versus the challenges?
Certainly when it comes to how they're using defence as part of soft power to have defence engagement with Chinese military, it's a very good move. For us to be one of only two nations live firing together, it's a great credit to what our military is doing. But you can't keep cutting our military and expect the same results. You can't keep doing that. We either have a credible defence force that's capable of meeting all of the challenges, including soft power, engagement and diplomacy, or we don't. And at present, the Prime Minister simply can't be trusted when she says that we'll do all these things, but we won't restore the budget.
The Prime Minister says that tomorrow she'll announce the development of a new cyber security centre. Do you endorse that?
Absolutely. There's an enormous amount of money being spent in terms of cyber security across not just the national security areas but also across industry. DSD, AFP, ASIO have all been working on that. To co-locate those and to join it and ensure cross-pollination on the surface seems to make a lot of sense. We haven't seen the detail, we haven't seen the announcement, but if the intent is greater cooperation between agencies, that would be supported.
Some people see the potential next war being an entirely cyber one, that you can take out the entire infrastructure, effective infrastructure of a country without firing a single bullet. Do you think that that the Australian people have adjusted their thinking to that as a threat, that the government, that the opposition has, that we've really come to terms of what the next conflict might look like?
Well, certainly Australian industry has. A number of the large defence companies and industry players have been investing quite heavily in cyber security and how they're going to deal with that. A lot of the cyber threats that Australia's been facing haven't just been militarily or government, they've actually been commercial, looking for commercial secrets, looking for commercial edges. So certainly our industry is aware of the threat. No question about that at all.
Do we need another capability plan on top of the defence capability plan as the Prime Minister has announced today?
I haven't seen what her intent for the capability plan is. It's an announcement, we'll wait and see. If they handle that capability plan as badly as the defence capability plan, then I think we're in trouble. They took the defence capability plan from 10 years to 4 years to 10 years. They've now gutted it by 37% and pushed it out. If they treat such a plan with respect, it may well have some utility, but we'll wait and see what it looks like. Thanks very much.
Okay, so that was the opposition's defence science spokesman Stuart Robert there live from Canberra.